Jeremiah 33 and verse 1, it says, "Then the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah the second time, while he was still confined in the court of the guard, saying, Thus says the Lord who has made the earth, the Lord who formed it to establish it, the Lord is his name. Call to me, and I will answer you, and I will tell you great and mighty things which you do not know. For thus says the Lord God of Israel concerning the houses of this city, and concerning the houses of the kings of Judah, which are broken down to make a defense against the siege ramps and against the sword, while they are coming to fight with the Chaldeans and to fill them with the corpses of men whom I've slain in my anger and in my wrath. And I've hid my face from this city because of all of their wickedness. Behold, I will bring to it health and healing. I will heal them, and I will reveal to them the abundance of peace and truth. I will restore the fortunes of Judah and the fortunes of Israel, and I will rebuild them as they were at first. I will cleanse them from all their iniquity by which they have sinned against me. I will pardon all their iniquities by which they have sinned against me, and by which they have transgressed against me. It will be to me a name of joy, praise, and glory before all the nations of the earth, which will hear of all the good that I do to them, and they will fear and tremble because of all the good and all the peace that I will make for it. Thus says the Lord, yet again, there will be heard in this place, of which you say is a waste, without man and without beast, that is, the cities of Judah and the streets of Jerusalem, that are desolate, without man and without inhabitant and without beast. The voice of joy, the voice of gladness, the voice of the bridegroom, the voice of the bride, the voice of those who say, Give thanks to the Lord of hosts, for the Lord is good, for his loving kindness is everlasting. And of those who bring a thank offering into the house of the Lord, for I will restore the fortunes of the land as they were at first, says the Lord. Thus says the Lord of hosts, there will again be in this place, which is a waste, without man or beast, and all the cities, a habitation of shepherds who rest their flocks. And in the cities of the hill country, and in the cities of the lowland, in the cities of Nevedge, in the land of Benjamin, and in the environs of Jerusalem, in the cities of Judea, the flocks will again pass under the hands of those who number them and say to the Lord. Just stopping there, we looked this morning and talked about praying, corporate praying. Really what this passage that I focused on was verse 3, and we'll talk about that at the end. But just looking at the things that Jeremiah sees, first we know that in the book of Jeremiah there's been much judgment, there's much heavy-handedness of the Lord upon Judea and upon Israel, that they've been put back, and a turning point starts in in chapter 31, where the Lord begins to change and to bring about good things for his people. But notice in verse 2 who it is. He establishes who he is. It says, Thus the Lord who's made the earth, and the Lord who formed it to establish it. The Lord is his name. Doesn't come out with a specific name because they know. We think about it when Moses said, Who do I say sent me? And said, I am sent you. In Revelation chapter 19 and verse 12, it talks about in their second return of Christ that a name will be written on him which no one knows except himself. His very presence defines who he is, his very characteristics and attributes. There's no one else with that name. There's no one else who can have that name. People can call themselves God or have small gods, but there's none that replaces the Lord himself. It goes on to talk about in verse 4 and 5 the current conditions of broken down, that it being desolate. He says at the end, he said, I've slain in my anger and in my wrath, and I've hid my face from this city because of all their wickedness. Just actually the removal of God's face being turned towards his people. And that's what we come this morning, is to seek the face of the Lord, to seek God's favor. Things may have been great this week. Things may have been not so good this week. But as we come to worship in spirit and truth, one thing is required is the presence of God. But in 6 through 9, he talks about the change, the things he's going to do. He says, Behold, I will bring to it health and healing. I will heal them, and I will reveal to them an abundance of peace and truth. I will restore the fortunes of Judah and the fortunes of Israel, and will rebuild them as they were at first. And just stopping there, if something's desolate, if something's empty of man and beast, and the town, the city's done away with, if someone would come in and just restore the fortunes and put things back to where they were when things were good, most people would be happy. Most people would feel satisfied in that. But notice in 6 he says, I will reveal to them an abundance of peace and truth. Verse 8, I will cleanse them from all their iniquity by which they've sinned against me. And I will pardon all their iniquities by which they've sinned against me, and by which they've transgressed against me. I think it's more than evident that God points out everything is done against him. Our sin is against him. Our disobedience is against him. Our unwillingness to yield is against him. But look at 9, it changes when he has the word me there. It says to me. It says it will be to me a name of joy, praise, and glory before all the nations, which will hear of all the good that I've done for them. And then look at this part. All the good that I've done for them, and they will fear and tremble. When God does good to us, do we fear and tremble? When God does good to us, does it make other people fear and tremble? Here is such a radical change that's coming about of God's hand of blessing upon them. The other nations are going to know that there's no way. No way it can be anyone else but the Lord. He goes on in 10 and talked about, yet again, will be heard in this place. And then what he's talking about is in verse 11, the voice of joy, the voice of gladness, the voice of the bridegroom, the voice of the bride, the voice of the ones that say, give thanks to the Lord, for the Lord is good, for his loving kindness is everlasting. This rejoicing, this put back, this peace and truth that brings it back, this city being refortified brings nothing but rejoicing. And I want to ask us this morning, it's not meant to be rebuking, but some over the summer there's been some really long pauses in the prayer time. And do we have something that one behind the other we can come forth giving praise and thanksgiving? Some are not here today due to sickness. Some are not here because the Lord's taken some from us in my 10 years I've been here. We have much to come before the Lord this morning, giving thanks and rejoicing. We have much to raise our voice of gladness and our voice of joy over. Then what we want to look at is the last part in verse 3. He states, the Lord states, call to me. There's an invitation. There's an urging to call out to him from a people who are desolate. Remember, it's not been restored. It's fixing to be restored, but God's urging them to call to him before what he's going to do. He says, and I will answer you. There's a promise there. I don't know about in y'all's household. We live in too large a home, and my hearing's starting to take a turn, I think. But I think my wife only calls from the living room when I get to the back bedroom. And I use that example to say we've called out to many people many times and there's been no answer. Maybe you have to go a room closer or raise your voice. But God says, call to me and I will answer you. This morning when we call out, he will answer us. He may not answer us immediately what you're asking for. He says, and I will tell you, there's an openness. There's nothing hid. He said, I will tell you great. The word there in the Hebrew means a number or magnitude, actually used to describe a man of large stature. We'd think of Goliath, who's 9 foot tall. We'd say that's a great man, a great size of a man. He says, I will tell you great and mighty things, inaccessible, incomprehensible. We have read as a benediction many times that he will give us, he will answer us exceedingly abundantly above all we can ask or think. That God's favor and God's blessing, and read an article the other day about unanswered prayer, and many times I've looked back on my prayers in years past, and the things I've asked for were really not helpful things for my soul. But God does answer, and God does give, and God gives us what we need to be more like Christ. He goes on finally to say, I will tell you of great and mighty things which you do not know. Think about it just for a moment, what you do know. And we're blessed here to have lots of intellectual people. So we know a lot of things. Now think about what God knows. It is inaccessible. It is incomprehensible. That God knows all things, and all things work together for the good, that he works all things after the counsel of his own will. That where your life is in this day and moment, the things we're about to pray for, God knows the outcome of those. So let's take time this morning to call upon this God who's invited us, to call upon this God who gives, to call upon this God who's able to hear and to answer. And the good thing is, he wants to answer us, to bring us about to this same thing, abundance of peace and truth. I'm going to ask Brandon Beck if he would open our prayer time this morning. I urge us to pray one behind the other.